Hello folks, welcome back to the W Club Decanted. Luke Crowley-Holland here. A couple of months ago while he was visiting London, I caught up with Dr. Blake Layfield, Maker's Mark Master Distiller, to discuss their new whisky, Star Hill Farm. We were waiting for the release of Star Hill Farm before we shared this episode, and I'm excited to say it's now available at the whisky shop. Although we don't expect it to hang around long, so hopefully at the time of listening you can still grab a bottle. Either way, I hope you find this episode as fascinating to listen to as I did to record it. Please excuse me erroneously refer to the new release as Starfield in the introduction and the touch of reverb on Dr. Layfield's line. Enjoy the show. Marvellous. Dr. Layfield, well, you did say call you Blake. So, Blake, thank you very much for joining us here on the W Club Decanted podcast. Really exciting to kind of get this opportunity to sit down and talk all things Maker's Mark and Starfield with you. So first, I suppose to start, you were appointed Master Distiller of Maker's Mark only last year, but you've been with Suntory for before that, and an even further longer career in whiskey before that. Do you maybe want to kind of start about your journey to this kind of prestigious role in your own journey in the whiskey industry?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Blake Layfield, and I'm the Master Distiller and Head of Innovation and Blending for Maker's Mark. And my job is to make the whiskey, to ensure that it looks good and it tastes even better following our founder's taste vision. And I've been in the industry for a little over 10 years, starting with more like the formal education side. I got my PhD in food science, which is a really interesting discipline in that you learn a bit of chemistry, microbiology, engineering, and sensory sciences that go into your food and beverages. And I leveraged that into a career in the spirits industry. And I've worked on products from beer, RTDs, tequila, gin, vodka, liqueurs, whiskey, you name it. Myself and my teams have probably made it, but I've never made a better whiskey than I have here at Maker's Mark.
Marvelous. No, it's quite the journey. And speaking of Maker's Mark, I suppose the name has long been associated with the Samuel family and been in the history of Make It since the 1950s. In terms of being a family business, does that still play a big role in how the brand operates today?
Absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite parts about working for Maker's Mark is the involvement of our founding family. Rob Samuels, who's the 8th generation farm distiller, and our managing director is my boss. And the interesting thing about the Samuels family is in the spirits business, there's always pressure on the short term to deliver the business and deliver the P&L. Think about that 1 to 3 year. But Rob and his family are much more of the long-term visionaries. Think that 5 to 10 to 15 years plus about what the brand, what the category can really mean. And they're always thinking with that long-term mindset. And it's really great because it gives you that North Star to which you're pursuing. And they set that vision with great clarity.
Yeah, and in terms of that long-term vision, I suppose over the last, I suppose you say 20 to 30 years, bourbon has had an incredible rise. I mean, people in bourbon fans and people working in the industry in the 90s, I'm sure couldn't have envisaged the kind of heights it would be at today. I mean, maybe they would dream about it, but it has been extraordinary over that period how it's grown. Can you give us your thoughts in kind of the evolution of American whiskey in the last few years, and in maybe in your time working in the industry, and what you think the future might hold for these big American bourbon brands?
Yeah, I think that if you look back at the past of Maker's Mark, when it was created in 1953, it was not the bourbon dynamic that we know in this day. It was actually bourbon had its rightful place at the bottom of the shelf. It was not seen as a high quality product. And that was where Bill Samuels Sr. and Margie Samuels created Maker's Mark, the liquid and the packaging to create the first craft premium bourbon. And it really changed how people perceived bourbon and American whiskey. So they took a market dynamic and they adapted and evolved it. And as you look at the current conditions, people are drinking less. But when they choose to drink, they're drinking better. And so we continue to look to the future as how do you create really premium products and experiences? How do you be transparent, sustainable, and make great whiskey? I think that's where the future is.
Yeah. Interesting. And you mentioned the word sustainable there. I suppose I was reading that Maker's Mark is B Corp certified. I'm not even 100% sure myself what that means. Can you explain what this entails and what it means for your kind of production?
Sure. So when you think about that word sustainability, people define that in many different ways. It can be environmental, it can be community, it can be with hiring practices, it can be with pay, it can be with diversity. It's many different definitions for sustainability. And that's actually what B Corp looks at. B Corp is the first and largest American bourbon brand certified under B Corp. And what it means is that you have a third party that comes in and they audit how you're giving back to your people, your staff, the community around you, and the environment, so that when consumers see that seal, they know that that brand, that product is authentically sustainable.
Yeah, I suppose it makes sense in the terms of like you were talking about the Samuel family and that kind of long-term vision. I mean, all whiskey brands or all effective and successful ones need to be thinking in that kind of 10, 30, 40-year period. So it makes perfect sense to me that you would make that kind of innovation or kind of take the lead on in trying to kind of build that into what you do. So I suppose the next thing that the makers range from kind of the 46 to the cellar age, I know are big amongst our W Club and whiskey shop customers and followers. Can you give us, in terms of your distillation process, your maturation process, can you kind of let us behind the scenes in terms of the production side of the whiskey?
Sure. Sounds like your listeners have great taste. Sure. So Maker's Mark is a little unique within the overall bourbon context. First, with our choice of wheat within the mash bill. Our mash bill is 70% corn, 16% soft red, winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. Most of the category is made with rye. Rye gives you a bold, spicy note. That spice is like a black pepper and a clove, whereas wheat is softer, sweeter, more delicate. And the spice note that you get is more of like your warm holiday spices. Think like your cinnamons, your nutmegs. And every drop of whiskey is made in Loretto, Kentucky at the distillery. We don't buy bulk, we don't sell bulk. And that's really important because we have our own water source. And that water in Kentucky, where 95% of bourbon is made, is really important because we sit on a limestone shelf, which removes iron from the water, which can make whiskey black and acrid, and it adds in calcium and magnesium, which gives you a nice fruity, fervid fermentation. It's also, Kentucky is a great location for corn and wheat. So we get all of our corn and our wheat within 75 miles of the distillery. So you get a real flavor of place, that flavor of terroir. We then take that through our distillation process. We distill our initial beer goes to around 8% alcohol by volume. That's distilled up to 130 proof, and that's 65% alcohol by volume. Remember, proof is the American term for ABV. Just take your ABV, your proof, and divide it by 2, and that gives you your ABV. So 100 proof is 50% alcohol by volume. And that's a relatively low distillation parameter. So you can distill up higher than that, but we keep it low because we want to retain as much of that flavor as possible. The higher you go in distillation, the more neutral your product becomes. So we want to try to keep it as low as possible in order to retain as much flavor as possible. We do ferment with a proprietary strain from the Samuels family that gives us a distinct stone fruit citrus type of flavor that is really unique to us. And then we enter into the cask, and that's what we call aged to taste. And to give a little context and dimension to what aged to taste means, we enter into the cask at 110. So we take that distillate that's at 130 proof, we bring that down to 110 proof or 55% alcohol by volume. And that lower entry proof is also unique within the industry. By law, you can't go over 125 proof, and that's where most people go into their cask. And that gives you a very different extraction from the cask than the lower entry proof, which we use, which is going to be more extracting the sweeter type of notes out of the wood. So think about those wood sugars, those barrel extractives. You're going to get more of those versus more of the color and the tannin pull that you get at the higher entry proofs. We only store our casks in traditional rick warehouses, so the casks are on their side, not vertical. Most people are now using vertical or palletized casks because they're easier and cheaper to build those warehouses, but you miss the contact with a good chunk of the barrel. So it causes, again, a different aging dynamic. We rotate our casks for consistency, meaning they spend the first 3 years of their lives at the top of the warehouse where it's really hot, a lot of extraction from the additive reactions from the cask. And then we hand rotate them, which doesn't mean that we spin them, but we move them from the top to the bottom where it's a different maturation dynamic, and you're going to get a lot more oxidation effects. And age to taste means our age spec is 6 to 8 years, targeting right around a 7-year-old whiskey. And what's important for your listeners to remember in American whiskey and in bourbon is that age is not an indicator of quality. It gives context, dimension, and direction, but it's not the only story. That's because our casks are new, meaning they have a lot of extractive power. And over time, if you leave them for many, many years in a traditional warehouse, it will over extract. It'll be very tannic, very woody, and it'll be very one-dimensional in flavor. So ensuring that you get the right maturation, not just age, is an important thing to consider within the particular American whiskey category.
No, it's fascinating, and the cask rotation, is that common amongst bourbon, and in terms of frequency, is that done like how many times within the life cycle of, is it an annual thing? Is it like, this whiskey's been here for 3 years? I mean, maybe I don't mean to drill, because there's a lot of really fascinating stuff you've covered there, but the reason I'm drilling down on this is this would kind of be alien to a lot of Scotch whiskey sort of fans in terms of this type of practice,
Yeah, so that practice of cask rotation is super rare. I don't really know of anyone else that does that within the industry. Most producers within the bourbon industry use what's called X-frame blending. So they pick a couple barrels from the top of the warehouse, a couple barrels from the middle, and a couple barrels from the bottom, like an X. They blend them together, and that creates their batch. But for us with the rotation, you're still going to get the variability, but it's just going to be less variability. And it's every 3 years. So at 3 years from the top, when they were put in, they'll rotate down to the bottom until they hit that perfect flavor profile. That might be anywhere from 6 years to 8 years. It just depends on the seasons.
Brilliant. No, that's fascinating. And Star Hill Farm is the home of Maker's Mark. And I believe you have a new release to that name. That's obviously one of the reasons why you're on today. Can you tell us more about a bit about the place itself and the product?
Sure. So Star Hill Farm is the location where the Maker's Mark Distillery is located. It's an 1,100 plus acre property. So that's like 100 US football fields all put together. That gives you kind of a general size of the place. And Star Hill Farm is the name of a new whiskey that we have. And it's new in a lot of different ways. It's the first new mash bills ever created by Maker's Mark. It's the first non-bourbon. This is a wheat whiskey, not bourbon. It's the first brand not called Maker's Mark, and the first brand that's not dipped in wax. And it's the first brand that is intended to educate and showcase regenerative agriculture and its influence on flavor. And everything we do at Maker's Mark is related to flavor. Bill Samuels Sr. with his choice of wheat, driven to his flavor vision. Bill Samuels Jr. with his choice of using French oak staves in order to drive flavor in different directions for Maker's Mark 46. Bill Samuels Jr., when he created 46, which was the first new innovation from 1953 to almost 55 years later, 2010, really set the guardrails for what innovation means for Maker's Mark. That's flavor comes from the place, meaning we're not going to do a sherry cask finish. We're not going to bring someone else's flavor into our whiskey. We want to be able to control that consistency. And flavor comes from nature. We truly believe that American whiskey and bourbon is nature distilled. It's pretty simple ingredients: grains, water, oak, yeast, time. How you articulate those variables creates the diversity that you see on the shelves. And when he set those guardrails, we've done a lot with oak. We've done private select, we've done wood finishing series, we've done cellar aged, a lot of different things around oak. And Rob started to ask the question, well, what about the grains? And so that led us to create our first new mash bill, which the Maker's Mark mash bill for bourbon is 70% corn, 16% soft red winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. We removed all the corn. So it's a 70% of wheat and 30% malted barley. And it gives a really complicated, complex, delicate note that's quite different from bourbon. And Rob then asked the question, well, how do you know that you've gone far enough if you haven't gone too far? So he created our second new mash bill, which was 100% malted wheat. And both of these, because they don't have corn in them, are now wheat whiskey. And wheat whiskey has very similar class and type to bourbon, with the main difference being bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn going into new casks. Wheat whiskey is 51% wheat going into new casks. Now, many wheat whiskeys in the category still use corn, but it's just a smaller percentage. We don't have any corn in ours. And the 100% wheat, malted wheat, gives a really delicate, fruity, floral. They're really interesting when you put them together, because I think of the 70-30 new make spirit and whiskey as giving almost like the backbone, like the core, the frame of the whiskey. And then the 100% malted wheat is like the salt and the pepper over the top. Like it articulates and it pulls flavor in different areas, and it adds a really nice kind of top note is what we would call it in the blending industry, top note to that base whiskey. Both of them together go into 5 different barrel types. So our classic Maker's Mark barrel, and then we had a bunch of experimental barrels. We had some that were American oak, French oak, hybrid barrels, and wave staves, which have grooves inside of the barrel, which increases the surface area, which gives you a lot of mouthfeel. Because we know how to make great bourbon, but we haven't done a lot of work with wheat whiskey. So this was a new learning experience for us. So we were experimenting and playing around. And as we started to ask questions about grain, we started to work with some experts at the University of Kentucky, Dr. David Van Sanford, and we asked him, well, what about grain varietals? We know our founder chose soft red winter wheat. Why didn't he choose hard? We know that he experimented with other ones. Are there varietals that have flavor, and what can you tell us about it? And he was kind of confused. And he said, in my 50 years of work, no one's ever asked me about grain variety and flavor. They only asked me about yield. How do I get more yield off the crop? So it was a really interesting question for him. And that question led us to look at not only grain varietal, but then where those grains are grown, like the terroir. So we tested 6 different plots all around Kentucky, the same varietal, and we got different flavors. We started to ask the question of, well, why are we getting different flavors? And that led us into the agricultural practices. And that led us down the path of regenerative agriculture, which looks at not only sustaining the soil, but improving the quality of it to get incremental nutrient density into the crops, which we think will drive to more flavorful whiskey. Just like the analogy I gave you around why 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky due to the water source and the impact of those trace minerals, why wouldn't the same principle apply to the grains themselves? Much like what separates a great chef from a lower tier, their obsession with getting the best, highest quality ingredients and then crafting that flavor with their art.
Yeah, very, very analogous to what you would find in wine. It's fascinating. I suppose. I mean, you're really selling it. I must say, this type of process must. I mean, if you're talking about different mash bills and selecting casks, it must have been quite a while in the making. This release.
Yeah. So this whiskey will be 2 different streams that are going into it. So the different mash bills, but 2 different years. So it'll be a blend of 7- and 8-year-old whiskeys, and this is a learning journey that we'll be taking everyone on.
Marvelous. And in terms of of the name Star Hill Farm. So I believe it's been kind of we were speaking about B Corp as well earlier. It's been innovating in the kind of regenerative agriculture sphere as well. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So Star Hill Farm, when you look at the Maker's Mark bottle and you see that seal or the mark of the maker where there's a circle and a star, that's for Star Hill Farm. The S is for Samuels, and the IB is for fourth generation commercial distiller. On Star Hill Farm wheat whiskey, you actually see an S8 because Rob is the eighth generation farm distiller. His father had two other distillers in his lineage, they just weren't commercial distillers. And some of the things that we do around regenerative agriculture are in partnership with a company called Regenified, who set the standard for what regenerative agriculture looks like, meaning you're not tilling the soil, meaning you're using cover crops and you're not leaving the soil bare and open to erosion, that you're planting different varietals of crops that are going in. So you've got rotation of crops and diversity of crops coming through, and that you have some animals that are on your farm. And the overarching idea is to reduce your dependence on chemical inputs, which tends to be the way of modern agriculture.
No, marvelous. And I suppose circling back to the whiskey, talk about the different sort of sources of flavor within that are generated from different aspects of the process and the terroir and everything we've described. Can you give a kind of top line sort of flavor tasting notes in terms of what people can expect, and maybe even compared to some of the makers that they might be familiar with, or those brands, and maybe some kind of serving suggestions?
Yeah, so if you look at Maker's Mark in the bourbon category, warm, pleasant, enjoyable with that kind of delicate caramel notes of vanilla, that stone fruit citrus type of note, and soft baking spices like your cinnamons and your nutmegs. When you look at Star Hill Farm wheat whiskey, it's not bourbon, it's wheat whiskey. It's very delicate, floral. The mouthfeel is quite different. You still get some of the sweetness, but a lot of the fruitiness is going to be more pear and apple. Think about some candied ginger and some burnt bitter orange, but it's all with incredible depth and complexity. And one of the things that I like to tell people with American whiskey in general, whether it's bourbon or wheat whiskey, is have a little fun with it. You don't have to be too serious with it. You don't have to really contemplate the whiskey and only neat. You can put it into cocktails. So I had a couple of really beautiful cocktails with Star Hill Farm wheat whiskey this past week. One was a riff on an old fashioned where they used Star Hill Farm wheat whiskey. They used, instead of simple syrup, they used a malted wheat syrup that you would get from like a brew shop, and then a dash of apple bitters. And that made a really beautiful old fashioned. I had one that was like a lower alcohol riff. So it was kind of like a spin on a 50-50 martini. So it was an amber vermouth with Star Hill Farm wheat whiskey in 50-50 proportion. And it cut the alcohol down, but it really layered in with that amber vermouth in a really interesting way. And then I also had one that was almost like a highball. So it was with apple cider. And this, because I mentioned all those fruity notes and that cinnamon stick type of note that's on there with those soft spices. And it went so well. So you can have it strong, you can have it long, or you can have it in moderation, and you're going to enjoy it no matter what, whether it's in a cocktail or neat or over the ice. It's a beautiful spirit no matter how you choose to enjoy it.
Yeah, the one with vermouth, that kind of sweet Manhattan almost style. That does sound appealing. I might want to get my hands on a bottle. Try that. In terms of getting hands on the bottle, I suppose we're here discussing the kind of the Star Hill Farm release. But when can our customers in the UK expect to be able to pick up a bottle?
You should be able to get it within the UK for about 100. Is it quid here? A hundred
Quid, I
quid.
suppose. Yeah, yeah.
100 quid
100
a
Spondulex.
bottle, and it should be hitting shelves here in the UK in late May, early June.
Nice. Something to look forward to.
It is a
Um,
very limited release. We are not making many bottles of this, so if you see it, you should buy it.
and in terms of how limited, how limited are we talking?
It's about the same size as cellar aged, so it'll be there and then it'll be gone.
Marvelous, brilliant. So I suppose that we've got to ask you like the mandatory three questions we ask all our guests. First of all, when for I suppose maybe you could answer it either double together or individually for either Makers or Star Hill Farm. What's your recommended this playlist? What music would you recommend listening to? Let's say this new Star Hill Farm release. If you've bought a bottle from the whiskey shop and you sit down at home, what are you putting on your Spotify?
Oh, that's a good question, Luke. I kind of like that. I'm gonna give you one that's gonna be very American of me, but I think I'll explain it. I would play Leonard Skinner, Simple Man, to go with Star Hill Farm. And the reason that I say that is that song talks about living a simple life. And again, American whiskey is pretty simple: water, yeast, grains, oak, time. It's simple. And that song also talks about having a higher purpose, having something that you believe in makes everything a little bit better. So Leonard Skinner and Simple Man.
Marvelous. That's a great answer. I suppose the other two questions we always ask: your first memory drinking whiskey. I know we spoke about your background in studying food sciences and that, but at what point in your life did you first sit down with a whiskey, either a good experience, bad experience, and that sticks out in your mind?
The first time I remember having whiskey was with my stepfather on our back porch. And I want to say that it might have been Maker's Mark, to be honest. It was a pretty popular brand in our house. And yeah, I just remember sitting out a summer night having it. I think that I may have been slightly underage, but close enough within the US context. And I just remember it being a really interesting experience.
Marvelous. No, that's it's those memories that are kind of our enjoyment of whiskey is made of. And I suppose finally, the last question before you leave us, Blake, is your favorite whiskey outside of the Makers Star Hill family. What's your go-to that's not within your range?
Well, I do work for Suntory Global Spirits, and we have got quite a good diversity of products. I'm pretty good pals with the chief blender of our Scotch house. His name is Callum Fraser. And don't tell him I said this, but he makes an absolutely fabulous dram. Bowmore 15 is amazing. It's one of my favorite products. It reminds me of sitting out by the fireplace around the holidays. I love the sherry cask notes and finish on it, and it tamps down that heavy Isla peat note just a little bit and adds that characteristic sweetness. It is one of my favorite whiskeys.
Marvelous, excellent answer, and we've met Callum. He's a great guy, brilliant. Well, Dr. Blake, thank you for your time today. I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on a drop of Star Hill Farm when it comes out, and I hope you have a fantastic remainder of your stay here in the UK.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, Luke.
Brilliant, thanks.